very hard to understand ourselves. We are very complex, and the world around us is complicated. One way of doing that is understanding that there are various parts or subpersonalities that reside within us. The more we can understand those parts, the better it will be for our lives, and the more we can understand ourselves. We are the most complex creature that we know of, and we're not given a manual. We can be pulled in lots of different directions at times. And an interesting idea is the idea of subpersonalities, that we're actually comprised as individuals of these various subpersonalities that have different intentions, that have different motivations, that can take over us from time to time. This is a theory or idea put forward by Richard Schwartz, and he formalized this in an internal family systems therapy. He was an MFT, marriage family therapist, who recognized and realized that when he was talking to his clients, they would often say things like, this one part of me wants this, or another part of me wants that. And it occurred to them that these parts seemed to be an aspect of the person, but were somewhat removed. Some other entity almost inside of them, pulling the strings or yanking them in a certain direction or pulling them in another different direction. And that these subpersonalities or these parts can come into conflict and they can cause friction. So one way of thinking about this is the inner critic. We all have an inner critic, that critical voice that pokes and prods and needles and sometimes has some very good points. And my inner critic's like a goddamn lawyer. The worst part about the inner critic, of course, is when the inner critic's right. Now, of course, that can be helpful. The inner critic ultimately wants what's best for you as an individual. So what Schwartz did, what he would have his clients do, was get to know these parts. The reason why he called it internal family systems is because he recognized that these parts seemed to be like a family. And when he was working with families as a marriage and family counselor, one of the things he would do is try to figure out how that family as a system can work better, how they can negotiate better with each other, how they can understand and relate to one another better. His key idea was these parts may operate like a family, and that a process could be taking the same lessons from marriage family therapy, but applying it to the individual and in these individual parts, and see how can they work better, how can they communicate better. It's a very interesting idea, and it looked like it was pretty effective, and it gave rise to this form of therapy. And one of the key aspects of internal family systems therapy is getting to know these subparts. One of the interesting ideas, which is very profound, and you can try this yourself, is that he would have his clients, when they're relaxed and when they're clear-headed, and in a neutral, non-judgmental way, ask these parts of themselves, what did they want? What was their goal? What were they up to? And they would get an answer. They would get some information. So, for example, hypothetically, you could talk to your inner critic. Now, it's important to do this in a non-judgmental fashion. Be calm, be receptive, and pay attention. Focus inwardly. You can do it through journaling, ideally with a therapist. But you can ask your inner critic, what does it want? How does it feel about certain things? What you'll typically find is that these subpersonalities that can cause conflict actually want what's best for you. It kind of makes me think about, and it's DMT. And Terence McKenna very famously had these experiences when he was doing DMT, when he took a lot of DMT with these machine elves, and many, many people have now had these experiences. He called them the machine elves. But it's quite a well-known phenomenon, obviously, where people take a large amount of DMT, or a certain amount of DMT at least, and then they have these experiences with these entities, and it can range from elves to extraterrestrials or clown figures. Either way, there were these figures that seem to emerge in people's minds, and people will say adamantly that these entities are real. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they are, of course. One hypothesis is that these are archetypes, Jungian type archetypes, or parts of ourselves that can become crystallized when we take DMT, and they sort of become an entity that seems real, that you can interact with in some sense. Some people might believe you're actually really genuinely going to another realm, perhaps. I don't know, I've never done it, so I wouldn't know. But either way, it's very interesting. People with dissociated identity disorder, or the kind of split personality disorder that people may hear of, or you see sometimes in movies. It's very rare, but people have a certain amount of amnesia when they're shifting between parts. So for example, when somebody is angry, or at least this is a hypothesis, when someone's angry, they have an amnesia and they can't remember what happens to them while they're angry, and that anger can become a fully fledged character or entity which takes over or possesses the person, an alter as they call it. That's very extreme cases, and dissociated identity disorder looks like it's a reaction to very extreme trauma. Either way, another example of how there are various parts of us vying for our attention. That's a more extreme form. And human beings throughout history have spoken about possession and spirits and demons. Jordan Peterson talks very eloquently and interestingly about the idea that these spirits or entities that you see again and again in lore and myth are actual psychological phenomena, but they exist outside of ourselves. So for example, we'll talk about how anger has a personality, and that if I'm angry or you are angry, that anger that we both experience is similar between us, even though we're different individuals, and that anger exists also across time outside of ourselves. So therefore, is it some kind of entity in and of itself? It's kind of a Jungian idea, an archetypal idea. Either way, the idea is that we have these subpersonalities, these parts, and that we can in fact actually get to know them. The more we get to know these various parts, and you can do this by asking in a calm manner, asking questions to if these parts, if you feel conflicted, if you're being pulled in different directions, take a breath, slow down, and maybe journal and ask these parts of yourself, what do they want? What is their intention? So there are some ideas of potentially how to understand ourselves better, understanding these various parts. Please like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think.